Another thing too is you don't want to try to feed a baby a bottle when they're extremely hungry, because they're going to be fussy and they're going to fight. So if you know that it's about to be, feeding time, give it before they start, exhibiting signs of hunger. If they're crying, it's too late. They probably will fight that bottle anyway.
Thanks for joining me for part 2 of breastfeeding questions with Brenna Lansden. Today we're going to cover a lot of topics related to breastfeeding, including how to get your baby to take the bottle once you're going back to work, also to help control spit up. So she's going to cover that as well. A lot of great questions that we got in today's segment. So thanks again for tuning in and check it out. All right, our next question is, how can I keep up my milk supply once baby starts sleeping longer through the night?
So I think this is a common concern with moms. Sleeping through the night is actually not a normal thing for newborn babies to do. Usually older babies, maybe around 6 months will start to sleep through the night. My daughter's 14 months old and she will still occasionally wake up. So I think that's just something that a lot of parents aren't used to, and it can be frustrating whenever, you have a baby and you want to sleep and they're not sleeping. A lot of the times moms will say, oh, my baby's sleeping through the night, and then my milk supply dwindled. Well, we have to remember that breastfeeding is all about supply and demand. So what I can recommend is, if your baby is, older, I don't recommend, trying these things, letting them sleep, because baby needs to be fed. But if you have an older baby and they are sleeping longer periods and they're gaining weight and meeting all those milestones, what I would recommend is, depending on when baby falls asleep and how long they're sleeping, you can try, if you notice a dip in your supply once baby starts sleeping longer periods, is to add a pump session right before you go to bed. Prolactin, which is the milk making hormone, is actually the highest at nighttime. So one way to combat, if you do notice a dip in your supply once baby does sleep through the night, is you can add that extra pump right before you go to bed. You don't necessarily need to wake up in the middle of the night. If you can, then that's great. But I also think sleep is important for mom too. So if you can just add that extra pump session before you go to bed, I think that's one way that you can combat that dip in your supply once baby starts sleeping longer periods.
This is another concern that I do see in the group a lot, about babies that are, breastfed from the beginning that start refusing the bottle. So especially for a mom that's returning to work, this can be a challenge or another stressor. So what do you suggest for the baby that's avoiding the bottle, or tips to get them to take the bottle?
So this can be super frustrating, especially you're already stressed out about, your baby's going back to daycare, you're going back to work. It's just another added thing. So the best time to, start introducing a bottle to a baby is about 4 to 6 weeks. And it's not uncommon for breastfed babies to refuse taking a bottle from mom. And that's because babies have a keen sense of smell, so they can smell mom. And then they also know that mom has the real goods to offer. So it's not uncommon for them to refuse to take a bottle from their mom. Neither one of my children I could ever give a bottle to. They just wouldn't take it. I actually had to leave the house because they have that keen sense of smell, because my children knew that I was in the household. So this is a normal thing. I know it can be frustrating, but this is not uncommon for breastfed babies to not take a bottle. So what I recommend is try to introduce a bottle, if you can, about 4 to 6 weeks, when baby's about 4 to 6 weeks old. You'll want to get a wide base nipple. Think of it as resembling a breast. We want one to look like a breast. And whenever you're giving baby a bottle, you want them to latch on kind of like they would be latching onto your breast. So we want them to, to get that wide gape. And you can also do, which I think this is important to talk about with daycare workers or babysitters or whoever, baby is going to be watching baby, is paste feeding. Paste feeding really mimics how babies would be nursing. If you want to do paste feeding, you would sit them up a little bit and you would really teach whoever is going to be watching your baby to mimic breastfeeding. So you would sit the baby up and you would have your wide base nipple, and you wouldn't instantly tilt the bottle down. We want the baby to nurse a little bit as if they were nursing on a breast, because that's what they're used to. So just with paste feeding, that can be a difficult thing for, daycare providers to kind of to get used to. So there's a learning curve with it too. But we really want to mimic bottle feeding to breastfeeding. That way there'll be less confusion when babies, switching back and forth. So paced feeding is one way. Some other tips are have somebody else give baby a bottle. You can warm the nipple up. Babies are really smart and they know when it's not the real thing. So one way is you can warm the nipple up. Don't make it super hot, just warm it a little bit. And that makes it more like mom's nipple, which a lot of babies are more likely to take. Another thing too is you don't want to try to feed a baby a bottle when they're extremely hungry, because they're going to be fussy and they're going to fight. So if you know that it's about to be, feeding time, give it before they start, exhibiting signs of hunger. If they're crying, it's too late. They probably will fight that bottle anyway. I think another thing too is to have patience. And I know that's easier said than done, but the baby will eventually, take a bottle. You may have to try a couple different bottles. As far as nipples, you will want a wide-based, slow flow nipple. The milk that comes out of your nipples when you're breastfeeding, that rate, the flow doesn't ever change. So you don't really need to start off, especially in the beginning, with a fast flow nipple. Just a slow flow nipple, wide-based. Another tip is to actually use motion whenever you're trying to give baby a bottle. So sometimes it's helpful if you're in a rocking chair. You can suggest that if the daycare worker is telling you your baby's refusing a bottle, try giving it in the rocking chair or even on an exercise ball. And we definitely don't want to force a baby to take a bottle. That's why that paced feeding is really beneficial, because it does mimic breastfeeding. It may take a little bit of time for baby to take a bottle, but they will. And those are my tips. I've had a lot of success, especially with the warming of the nipple. It seems to work really well, because it does help babies. It kind of tricks babies a little bit into thinking, oh, this is kind of warm like mom, and it tastes kind of like mom. So they'll be more likely to take it.
Okay. And so for warming the nipple, then, is that similar to warming up like formula or milk? Would you put it in a measuring cup with hot water? How would you do that?
So what you'll do is you'll take the nipple and you'll run it under some warm water. It doesn't have to be hot. Just right before you give baby the bottle, make sure to wipe, if there's any water droplets off of it. But you'll do that right before you give baby the bottle. That way the nipple is still warm.
My breastfed baby spits up a lot. Is there anything I can do to help that?
Basic anatomy tells us that babies are more likely to suffer from spit up or GERD. This is because their stomach and their esophagus are really close together, and the little sphincters that actually close off to their stomach aren't the strongest yet. So it's easy for them to, spit up and have GERD. A few ways that we can try to combat that, then try laid back nursing. So gravity works in your favor with that. And that kind of helps to slow a little bit of the milk ejection. And so babies do a little bit better with spit up if you do that. Also, try to sit your baby up. We don't want to put a ton of pressure on their abdomen, but if you keep them sitting up, then that can also help decrease spit up. I will say this, babies spit up a lot. Some babies spit up more than others. Sometimes it causes them discomfort, sometimes it doesn't. Every baby is a little bit different, but it's not uncommon for most babies to spit up frequently during the day. And again, this is just because of how their anatomy is. The older they get, typically, the further away that stomach and the esophagus get. They, as adults, ours are a little bit further away, and those sphincters are able to close better, the less likely they are to suffer from GERD.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. This was part 2 with Brenna Lansden, your top breastfeeding questions. We are going to be doing part 3 on April 15th, so definitely stay tuned and come check that episode out. In that episode, we're going to be covering all kinds of things related to breastfeeding, including medicines to avoid or medicines that are okay during cold and flu season, and to help with milk blebs. another really awesome interview with Brenna. So definitely stay tuned for that one, and we will see you then.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mom Talks with Krista. If you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and click on the subscribe button. It should be down here somewhere. We release new episodes every single Wednesday. And if you're not following us yet, be sure to follow us at Mommy Knows Best on Instagram. And remember, if you're watching this and doubting yourself, you are a great mom. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week.